Okay. Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a great first block of sessions. Really excited to see everyone again today, and just wanted to give just a quick overview of where we are. We had a great opening keynote from Robin Morris Collin, talking about what the EPA is doing around environmental justice. Really interesting stories and insight about the monies that are out there. That she says something very important. It's not that communities don't have capacity; it's that they don't have access, right? And she also talked about imagination and vision. What's your vision for what you want to do with your life and your community? How can we build? She talked about building and growing things. And remember, environmental justice is not just about what's bad, it's about what's good. She talked about hope, right? And opportunity, how to get into business, then social impact entrepreneurship. She told some really great stories that provide guidance for what we can do moving forward in environmental justice. And remember, the theme that we're talking about across these 5 days, day 1, day 2, virtual, day 3, hybrid, day 4, virtual 2, and day 5 in person. We're talking about people, power, and politics. And for our lunchtime keynote today, we have my friend Justin Pearson. Really excited to have him today. We had a quick conversation about our experiences with COVID, and won't share too much about that. But he's dealing with COVID right now, so appreciate him being here with us today. So I'm gonna first, give a little bit of background on Justin, and I'll pass the mic to you, Justin, after I go through your bio. So we have Justin Pearson, District 86 State Representative, Tennessee General Assembly. Also, as you all should be aware, unless you've been hiding somewhere, part of the Tennessee 3. Justin is a member of the Tennessee House of Representatives, representing District 86, a sprawling area along the Mississippi River, spanning from South Memphis through downtown and north to Middleton, Tennessee. He's a community organizer. He became the second youngest lawmaker serving in the Tennessee House of Representatives, was elected to office on January 24th, 2023, at the age of 28. As I say, he's an organizer and servant leader who prioritizes the need of people. When a mass shooter took the lives of took the lives of folks at the Covenant School in Nashville, Tennessee, Justin, along with fellow state representatives Justin Jones and Gloria Johnson, staged a protest for common sense gun legislation on the Tennessee House floor. There was some retaliation. He was expelled on April 6, 2023. Local authorities in Memphis and Nashville reinstated the legislators several days later. He ran for office again, handily winning back his seat with nearly 94% of the vote. When you think about the issues that Justin's working on, he, as I said, is an environmental justice advocate. He founded the group Memphis Community Against Pollution, originally called Memphis Community Against the Pipeline, a coalition focused on landowners and grassroots citizens to counsel the construction of the proposed Bahia oil pipeline. So you think about Justin's work. He's a legislator, he's an advocate, he's an activist. And so today, we're talking about people, power, politics. Justin's work is an embodiment of the people, giving power to the people in politics. So I'll go ahead and pass the mic to Justin. Let's go, Justin. Tell us the story. Tell us what you're doing these issues, and give us some guidance and tips on how we can move forward on environmental, climate, and energy justice. You have the floor, sir.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Wilson, and thank each and every one of you for your support on the journey when we were fighting the pipeline or fighting for just gun reform legislation. I'm really humbled and honored to be here and to share with you for just a few moments some thoughts, some ideas about people power. And so I just love the connection of all of these words and all of this work because it matters, and how we influence politics, how we create the type of country, the type of community that we want to have. It has a lot to do with us building that power and building our networks together. So again, thank you, Dr. Wilson. Thank you to this esteemed organization and to all of you who have committed your time for these next several days to be deeply invested in building both the grassroots movement and organizing, and also building this broader movement for justice, for environmental justice, for climate justice, for people, particularly those who have been left and pushed to the margins of our society. I have often spoken about people power. When we were fighting the pipeline here in Memphis, we talked a lot about people power because people power is fueled by something that corporations cannot buy, People power is fueled by something that politicians cannot pay off. It is fueled by love. And it is our love for our communities. It's our love for our futures. It's our love for one another that fuels our people-powered movements. And that is what I believe ultimately. I'm going to say a few more words about tactics and strategy, but I believe that is ultimately why we can rest assured that we will be victorious in our fight for environmental justice, for creating these futures that are more beautiful, these futures that are brighter, these futures that have more opportunity for our communities rather than more toxic facilities in our communities. It's because what we care about and how we fight is rooted in love of our communities, rooted in love of our people, our sense of place, our dignity, our ancestry, our ancestral homes. And so it is this that gives me hope that we will never quit, and thus we will never lose. And so when I look at these corporations who spend all of this money and do all of these things to try and convince our communities that these toxic facilities are good for us or anything like that, I think about the love that has gotten us here and the love that will continue to push us forward. And so I hope that you cherish that and remember that even in the most difficult days of these most difficult fights that we are in. It's important to realize where we are. We're in a difficult spot when it comes to the predicament in which we find ourselves. You can look at Maui and the fires there that have ravaged the island. You look at Libya, where over 2,000 people are gone missing after severe flooding. You can look at Morocco, where an earthquake has shattered a small country. You can look at Canada, the forest fires have been so bad that it's polluting the air of even folks in New York and the DC area. All across our country and all across our world, we are seeing our interconnectedness. And we are seeing the effects of the lack of care and concern of our climate impacting the most vulnerable communities. In fact, it's being more clear that the places that are being impacted the most is happening to the people who have done the least to create the climate problem. It's the sacrifice zones, as Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali talks about often. These communities that are being sacrificed now are predominantly socioeconomically depressed areas, predominantly areas where people of color live across our country and across our world, are devastating. And this is our reality now. It's one that's been being built up over centuries. Centuries of pollution taking priority over people, centuries of a status quo that has allowed for the wealthy and the rich to trample on the rights of the poor and the socioeconomically depressed. This is what we are reaping because of seeds that have been sowed, that have privileged the voices of those in power and not listening to those who are consistently and continuously being disempowered. And in this moment, we are seeing that the consequences aren't just on some pieces of paper. It's quite literally in the lives that are being lost because of the inaction and the unwillingness and the moral deprivation to care about those who are most marginalized. And so I come to you mourning as well, mourning where we are, but not as a people, as a person without hope, but with a realistic optimism that we are not going to change our reality if we do not work actively for a different future. And we know that a different future is possible. We know that it is possible because we have seen time and time again, community after community after community organizing and mobilizing and activating to create change. And that's what gives me the most courage and hope with this group of people here. That's what gives me the most courage and the most hope for our country and for our planet, even as we mourn and even as we grieve. It's the recognition that all hope is not lost. And how do I know that? As a person who is from Memphis, Tennessee, I've seen this firsthand in our environmental justice fight. And I know one of my coalition partners, our first coalition partner, in fact, Breach Collective, are here, a part of this group joining virtually, who helped us to beat the Byhalia Connection pipeline. But it didn't start off as a fight that we knew we would win. It was much like the other fights that many of you are a part of. It's the David and Goliath story. But I tell people to always take heart in the David and Goliath story, because we know how the story ends, right? It always looks impossible. It always seems impossible until we pick up those smooth stones. And what does it look like? What stones must we, as community organizers, as professors, as politicians, like what are the stones that we have to make sure are smooth and rounded in order for us to be successful? I think one of the first stones that we have to have is proximity. I think we have to be proximate to the people in our communities. We have to be proximate to the people who are most affected by climate change and environmental injustice. We cannot create and build if we do not listen to those who are suffering the most. I live in Southwest Memphis. My grandmothers lived here as well. They both died from cancer in our community that has 4.1 times the cancer risk than the national average because of the toxic release inventory facilities that are surrounding us. They were killed because of environmental injustice, but we didn't have those words until we were fighting the Byhalia Connection Pipeline. But then I started to connect the dots and it became more clear what was happening. But we have to be proximate. We have to be in the communities and near those communities that are suffering the most if we are going to actually be a part of the transformation that the communities ask for and deserve. We have to be proximate. I think that's one of the smooth stones that we have to have. I think another smooth stone we have to have is prayer. It is not to push any religion or religiosity on anyone, but it is to say to anyone who is in the fight and the struggle for justice, whether it be social justice or racial justice, environmental justice, climate justice, that in order to stay in this fight, you have to have things that are more powerful than oneself that you can call on during this struggle, because these corporations have billions of dollars. They have attorneys after attorneys after attorneys that they can call on and that they can use in order to break your willpower and break a community's willpower. But if you're going to keep your moral fortitude and if you're going to keep your power intact, I think that you have to have connection to something more powerful. And so I encourage you all to remain prayerful in your fight and in this fight for justice. That's another smooth stone that we need. I think another stone in our David and Goliath journeys that we must have is what Heather McGhee calls the solidarity dividend. This is a really important one because all of the movements in American history have been successful based on really the solidarity dividend. She explains it in more or less this way, that when white folks and black folks, rich folks and poor folks, people with PhDs like Dr. Wilson and people with no Ds like me get together, when our organizing gets together, it disrupts what the society anticipates for communities that have been called the quote unquote paths of least resistance, as our community was called. It disrupts that understanding of the world. If the pipeline company's playbook says that if we go through Boxtown or Westwood, the neighborhoods where I'm from, that this Byhalia Connection Pipeline was supposed to go through, would have poisoned 1 million people's drinking water. 1 pound of crude oil would have contaminated 250,000 gallons of our drinking water. We're talking about real consequences to these decisions, but they called our community the path of least resistance because for years it has been not invested in. They looked at the history books. They saw redlining. They looked at the history books. They saw that they didn't give our schools textbooks. They looked at the history books. They saw we were denied job opportunities. They looked at the history and they said, this is a place that is a path of least resistance because people have not invested in it. Now, the people there never viewed themselves that way. But everyone who did have power, everyone who was in a position of power, even in politics, and the politicians had given up on the people in our community. And so the corporation thought they could use the same playbook they used everywhere else and exploit our community again. But obviously, we had a different history for them. But the reality is when we built our movement here locally that invested in our broader communities' power, which was connecting the people in Southwest Memphis to the people in Midtown and the people in the suburbs, to let them know that it's our land that's being taken, but it's all of our water that's being poisoned. We taught the people who were less proximate, who were wealthier white people most often, that their destinies were truly tied up in the destiny of the socioeconomically oppressed people in Boxtown whose land was being stolen. And that if they didn't speak the language of eminent domain, and we didn't speak the language of aquifers and learning more about waterways and learning more about what the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers were doing, we would all lose. We learned the importance of building power through the solidarity dividend, and building this multiracial, multi-generational, multi-ethnic movement was a source of strength and a source of power for us that allowed us ultimately to be victorious. It brought people like Vice President Gore to Memphis, Tennessee. It brought Bishop William Barber from the Poor People's Campaign to Memphis, Tennessee, to Westwood, to the hood, to one of the most segregated places in the city. We brought power to the people, because power lives within the people. It is not something that is going to be given from the outside. Sometimes you have to be reminded of your power, sure, but it is something that is intrinsic in who we are and in our ability to send those emails, to write those letters, to show up to city council meetings and county commission meetings. We have power, and we have to continue to tap into it and remind people in our communities of their power. And when we do that, when we build that collective power, change happens. And what I would encourage as another smooth stone for you all to remember is social location. The power of social location. It is very easy to take pedigrees and privilege and do anything else. And you all who are in this movement know this well. But it is so integral and so important that we choose to be proximate and to choose a social location with marginalized folks every time. It is never okay for us to choose to side with the corporation. It's never okay for us to even choose to side with the president and the vice president, though we might like them or support them, against the will of our people. We have to choose a social location every single time with the folks who are being most persecuted and most marginalized. Because it is in doing that that we rewrite and transform what it means to create justice. And we say justice won't be created from ivory towers, and justice won't be created just by those who wear suits and ties and sit in Capitol buildings. Justice is going to be created from the ground up. It's going to be created by a people-powered, proximate movement of people who are desperately, lovingly interested in saving the environment for ourselves, but also for future generations. The indigenous communities that we have the privilege of working with teach us a lot about 7 generations. What are we doing for the 7 generations to come? What are we doing for the people who will be here for years and years after we are gone? Are we doing everything that we can? And that ultimately, as I wrap up, is the important question we have to ask ourselves. It is not to wear yourselves out, but it is an important inquiry. Are we going all in? That's the question. Are we all in? In poker, you put your chips all in when you believe that you've got the best hand. Well, I believe that in this multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-socioeconomic movement that we've got the best hand because we are right. We're not just right because the science is on our side. We're not just right even because God is on our side. We're not just right because we've got the best people on our side. We're right because we know that 7 generations from now, our descendants will look back at us and be proud of the fight that we are giving in order to preserve the air that they breathe, the water that they drink, and the soil in which they will be able to plant. But we have to be all in. I'll just say this last thing and then I'll be done. We have watched over the last several years the Supreme Court strip away our rights with the Voting Rights Act, tell women that they're second-class citizens, stripping away the right to abortion, which is an environmental justice issue. We have seen the Supreme Court and the conservative majorities across our country continuing to reduce our rights. But there has been organizing for years and years and years to get to this point. Over 50 years of organizing to get Supreme Court justices and presidents who are also authoritarian dictators and things like that elected. That there was organizing for decades and decades and decades to get to the point that they would be able to take away a woman's right to choose. They did this for decades and decades and decades of organizing and mobilizing and activating, and we have to organize and mobilize and activate with just as much care, with just as much concern, with just as much vigor, believing just as hard in what we believe in about a more just country, about a more just future, about a more just world. We have to be willing and ready to go all in, just as they have gone all in for things that are different than what we might believe. We have to go all in for exactly what we believe, because what we believe is a benefit to everybody, whether they be Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal. Everybody deserves clean air. Everybody deserves clean water. Everybody deserves clean soil, and everybody needs to be all in this movement. And so I'm just glad to be here with you, all in. And let us be all in every day that we can. Rest when you must, but realize that we have to give all that we can, because now is the moment. Now is the time. And now we have the ability to do something. And so let us not get weary in our well doing. Thank you all so much for having me, and I look forward to your questions.
Amen, brother. Rest when you are weary, but be all in. Power to the people, right? Power. You got me ready to jump up. Let me take this mask off. Power, 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 power. Wow. Representative Justice Pearson, everybody. That was amazing. I mean, I call myself the hype man, the research minister of environmental justice. I appreciate what you just shared, those powerful words about what this movement's about. This movement's about the people, right? This movement's about our power. We have power. I mean, inspired, that's an understatement. I want to take questions. If there's questions from the audience, but just to kind of go back to what you said about, this movement and how we bridge. Talk more about, as we wait for questions, talk more about how do we bridge across those divides. Bishop Barber, Reverend Barber said there's really no divides. There's an opportunity because people are experiencing the same issues. So he talked about how do we move beyond, they look at the intersection of race and poverty, but there's no real divides. How can we build this bigger tent you're talking about? Give us some examples of what you're doing on that front.
Yeah, I mean, it's the intersectionality of the movements, right? One of our closest partners has been Planned Parenthood, right? I really do believe that silos are really just an opportunity for segregation that makes it more difficult for us to organize and mobilize our power. And so one of the things, right, is if there's an issue you don't know a whole lot about, is to get close to it, right? I mean, the best thing I think for the environmental justice leaders and the people in the movement, if you want younger people to be a part of the movement, which was a directive that I had for myself this particular year, well, we went to the high schools, right? And we went to some of the youth-led organizations, particularly dealing with a criminal legal system. And we went to young people and said, hey, what is it that you would like to see? What are your thoughts? What are your ideas? I do think that if we're going to build power, it is going to require us to look across the spectrum about what's impacting people. When I think about Scotty, Linda Fitzgerald, and Clyde Robinson, who are two landowners who fought against the pipeline, there are so many different intersections that they stood at. She was a Black woman, descendant of enslaved people, right? Like, you've got so many things that our communities represent. I think about the Kingston coal ash folks. These were white folks predominantly who were significantly harmed, or a lot of the workers unfortunately were killed because of the Tennessee Valley Authority's toxic coal ash bill. They were socioeconomically depressed white people. They were white, right? They were women. They were, right, like the widowed. There were so many different elements that were impacting them, because when you get to somebody's air, right, being polluted, when you get to somebody's water being destroyed, when you get to somebody's soil being toxic, there were some things happening before that, right? The same communities that experience environmental injustice are also the same communities that are the most policed. They're also the same communities that have the least amount of educational investment, and they're the same places where people don't have healthcare access and work jobs most likely that don't offer healthcare. So the environmental justice movement really is an intersectional movement, and it's one of our great hopes to build a multiracial movement that changes the country. It is similar in some ways, as I'm saying, to the gun violence prevention movement, that there's a real opportunity for there to be the solidarity created, because regardless of race, class, gender, sexuality, sexual orientation, those things, when it comes to the rights that you believe another person deserves, right? Just as another human being on this planet, um, them having water and having soil and having air that's not being poisoned and polluted, right? Like that's up there at the top of the list. But I do think it is us attacking, not attacking, that's not the right word. It is us really grappling with the issue of racism and working through the barriers that race has been used to create separation when it comes to the intersectionality of these issues as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. No, that intersectionality is really important. You talked in your earlier part of your response to the question. I just want to highlight we will have a session called "Say Her Name," Roe v. Wade and reproductive justice. So just again, that intersectionality of those issues, and I appreciate your examples of talking about land ownership. Right? We've talked in the last few days. I mean, well, not few days. We talked today, yesterday, about issues of land. But we're gonna have a lot of sessions about food issues, food justice. There's gonna be some food sovereignty, land sovereignty, energy sovereignty, right? So there's a lot of intersections there, and you see that also with your work in Memphis with the issues of energy sovereignty as well with the pipeline fight. So we got another question from the audience, and keep audience, please keep putting the questions in for us. You got Justin here. I know he got y'all hyped up, ready to go. What did you say? Rest. We need a rest, but you got to be all in. When you're doing EJ, everybody, again, I want to highlight that. You can't take time off. This is a tough movement to be in. It's a tough space to be in. But that hope, that love is part of the energy and nutrition. Working with people, working with community, that's part of the energy and nutrition that keeps us going forward. Building off the legacy of our ancestors, right? We're on their shoulders, keeps us moving forward. They have passed the baton, and we got to keep running with that baton, right? But make sure, again, we take some rest, as Justin said. So next question, Justin. Can you talk more about voting in 2024? What does it mean? And how can we get more communities, get the communities most impacted out to vote? Because sometimes, as was stated, I think in one of the sessions yesterday, I think in the OCP session, you get a lot of folks who end up voting in the presidential election, but then you got these state elections, county and local. So can you just talk more about voting and why it's important, how we can get people out?
Definitely. I mean, we've got to be civically engaged. A people who are not civically engaged are preparing themselves for legislative annihilation. And I've witnessed it at the State House here in Tennessee. If you are not civically engaged, you are preparing yourself for legislative annihilation. They will legislate us into bondage in so many different ways. And it may not look like it did 150 years ago. But when I tell you that 1 out of 5 Black people in the state of Tennessee cannot vote, that is not accidental. We have to be participants in our democracy. And so here's what I would recommend for any individual. Do not, here's a myth that has to be broken. You do not need to be elected to have and to make change. You do not need to be the CEO of an organization to register someone to vote, right? Like, just do it, right? Who's that? Nike, right? Like,
Yes,
just
sir.
do it. It is an opportunity for you to just take ownership of saying, I personally, I'm going to register 10 people to vote for next year's election. Now, next year is a presidential election. But if you do this work, right, you become a registrar. In some states, you have to be a registrar. In Tennessee, they've made that more difficult. So that's one of the barriers. But if you become a registrar in your state, or if that is something that you're interested in doing in order to help, do that. But get the ability to register people to vote. Commit to registering 10 people. Go to your church. Go to your fraternity. Go to your family. Actually, go to your family first. Because let me tell you, as a person with the family members ranging in about a 500 people range, I'm Southern. It's a lot of us. Um, there are people in my family who weren't registered to vote, right? First time they voted was in my election in January. And then I learned there were a lot of people who weren't allowed to vote. And so that was knowledge too. But start with your family, start with your friends, then go into your broader community and just say, I'm going to register 10 people. But here's what you do. You don't just register them, because a lot of organizations, a lot of nonprofits, they just pride themselves on, we registered 100 people to vote. That's actually not enough. You got to make sure they get to the polls. So you got to call. You got to say, hey, did you make it? Hey, did you make it? Did you go yet? Early voting has started. Have you voted? Have you voted? Have you voted? You have to build sort of that kind of infrastructure. And then if they say, I don't have a ride, you have to say, I can get you there, or my aunt will get you there, or I can make sure you get a ride. You have to follow people through the entire process to get them to vote, because what you're doing is reducing the barriers to entry. And that's the antithetical to what some people are doing, which is increasing the amount of barriers as much as possible. But as I tell people, Dr. Wilson, I said, our ancestors had to take these tests, looking at soap and being told how many bubbles were on it, right? Like had to guess how many jelly beans were in a jar, had to pay a poll tax. So and they still went to vote anyway. And so, despite all the barriers to entry that we are experiencing, we've got to vote anyway. So when you are meeting people or encountering people who say, man, this is hard or something like that, you say, listen, we've got to vote anyway. And so the way that I would start organizing is to reach out to your networks that are close to you, which are likely your family and friends, and then branch out from there into your organizations and communities and set a goal. I mean, I helped run a nonprofit previously that had about 30,000 alumni. And I set a goal of having at least 20% of them to go to the polls and to vote in the presidential election in places like Georgia. And we were successful with that. But you set a goal that's attainable, and you don't feel like you've got to get it all figured out to just do this. And the best website that I can give you to start is vote.org. Just vote.org. It has everything you need. People can check their registration. People can also register on that site.
No, thank you for that. So I like to say, to make a democracy work, it takes work. so y'all heard Representative Pearson, and I know I was very personal calling him Justin. Just so everybody know, I knew Justin before, so I'm maybe a little bit too comfortable. So Representative Pearson, make sure I'm saying that. make sure I'm saying it. But yeah, get 10 people. Start with your family. Do your own power map, right? Your network map. Who's in your network, and get those folks. But like you said, you get them to sign up, to register, but then you got to make sure they get there. And that's the work of environmental justice. We get to a certain point where we got to implement. We get to a certain point we have to actualize. We get to a certain point we got to hold to account, right? So that's an important part of this journey, this process. And again, I'm using your term, Justin. I'm gonna call it Justinism. You got to be all in, right? But you got to be all in on these social movements. So let me see if there are any other questions from the audience. We got the one question. Let me see what else we have. So you talked about voting, and again that's important. Can you talk a little bit more about your thoughts about? You talked earlier about gun violence and the intersection there. Can you share with the audience some of what needs to happen solution-wise in your state and beyond to address this? I mean, we talk about the pandemic with COVID. We have a pandemic of gun violence.
No, honestly, we had the opportunity to meet with President Biden, Vice President Harris, and we're asking that they declare a public health emergency as it relates to gun violence. Gun violence is the number one killer of our children in our state, more than cancer or car accidents. It's actually gun violence. This is having a serious implication on our community's ability to thrive, because people live in constant fear. And there's a direct correlation between the state legislature passing laws that were intended to weaken gun safety regulations and the violence that we've seen increase. Homicides went up. We saw an increase in car thefts because people are looking for guns because you no longer need a permit to carry one. And so we're seeing a direct correlation here, and then we're seeing misplaced anger. And so now the anger is misplaced, and it's on, again, super predator children, right? Everybody's blaming children now for the reason. Now, 90% of the crimes in our state are still being done by adults. The state legislature, which is majority Republican, majority white, passed these laws that led to these problems. But now the issue is all about young Black kids. And so I think there's always a need to redirect misdirected anger and anguish to where the root causes of the problems lie, right? And so if people are, as you are engaging in this fight in particular, I think it is really important to make sure that we are being responsible stewards of the movement, which means that we choose that social location on the side of oppressed people. And we say, look, it's very easy to pick on the kid. It's very easy to pick on Black folks. It's very easy to pick on poor folks. But it's like, that doesn't seem right, right? Like, well, what does it mean to stand for justice, even amidst a situation where the easy answer seems to be too easy, right? I think about in this gun violence movement and the environmental justice movement, I'm really Dr. Wilson, and I'm working on this thinking of how they connect, because it is the environment, right, that people are living in, right, that are suffering, and it's psychological, it's physical, it's emotional, the trauma that children are having to carry in their bodies, parents are having to carry in their bodies as they continue to live their lives. You know, you've probably heard me talk about this. My classmate Larry Thorne was killed earlier this year, and he and his mom and I talk once a week at least. There's something that happens in the shattering of communities in this way that has to stop, right? But it isn't going to stop if we aren't all in. It isn't going to stop if we are not advocating at our state houses and our city councils and our county commissioners for change. And so what people can go to our website, votejustinj.com, because we're going to be launching a very intentional effort here in the state of Tennessee, in the South, right, where people say these things aren't possible. An intentional effort to get policies and laws and referendums passed at the local and the state level to make our community safer and to quite simply protect kids, not guns. Now, that's an uphill battle against the National Rifle Association, the American Firearms Association, the Tennessee Firearms Association, and some billionaires who would prefer us not do anything about AR-15s being in the hands of people that they shouldn't be in. But when you know what we know, right, about the dangers of these weapons, about the consequences of these weapons in our communities, then there's no choice but to act. And I think that's where we are at this point.
No, those are very powerful words. I mean, for me, you talked about the trauma that folks are experiencing every day, the psychosocial stress that folks are experiencing today, and the intersection of that type of stress, right, with gun violence, with the issues of environmental pollution in the communities. I mean, one of the things I like to say, Justin, is how are you going to put America first as a RIF if you don't put your kids first? Where you're talking about gun violence, you're talking about healthcare for children, K to 12. You're talking about exposure to pollution, access to food. I mean, we should be emphasizing valuing our kids and investing in our kids in the health, welfare, and safety of our children. So I appreciate those points that you shared with the audience. I'm going to go to a couple more. We have a few questions in the chat. Let me see if you can get into this one. Can you address how political action committees get people elected and the importance of electing people that represent the communities that they live in to make change at the local levels?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Great idea. We launched a political action committee called Movement for Justice, political PAC, here in Tennessee, just to do that, to elect progressive members who believe in the issues that we believe in, from gun violence prevention to environmental justice to climate justice to food justice. It matters. I think for too long, the nonprofit academic world had been separate from politics. And the reality is politics has significant influence over our lives. Before I was in the state legislature, I didn't know how much power state governments had, right? Until I started to see these laws passed that I knew would change the trajectory of children's future for generations. And they're being passed on a whim with very little opposition or very little discussion, but they're becoming the law of the state. constitutional amendments and things like this that have severe consequences for generations to come, just getting passed through. And we oftentimes have had leaders there, leaders particularly of our own parties even, sometimes, who are sticking with that status quo, keeping things going just the same. And the reality is you've got to have elected leaders who believe in the future that you are invested in creating. And the reality is, if you have the energy and a few resources to help support candidates or to run for office yourself, do it. Because there are people who are much less capable, much less qualified, much less deserving of being in positions of power who have them, who should not, who there is someone else who looks a lot like you, who could be in that position of power. And so I think political action committees and supporting candidates directly even is a great way to make sure that we have more people from our communities rise up. And I can tell you for myself, next year, I will be looking for some candidates, particularly some African-American women. Our district is our community, 64% African-American women, to run for some state house seats. And we will be supporting them with significant investments from our PAC. And so I support that 100%.
No, thank you for that. So I think when it comes to, again, as Representative Pearson said, everybody, we have this intersectionality, these issues, right? And I talked about earlier, you might have heard this, the octopus of oppression, whether it be is this whole octopus. So how do you bring this movement together? Because we're fighting against, folks who, may not be reproductive justice issues or brutality issues, gun violence, environmental justice, right? Climate change, women's right to choose, all these issues, right? It's that same system that's dividing, that's discriminating, that's diminishing, invisibilizing, marginalizing folks, right? So I think what you're saying is a powerful frame for how we can move forward. So as part of the multi-pronged approach, we have to, for this specifically EJ movement, PACs, right? A PAC on human rights, clean air, the clean air PAC, right? The clean water PAC, the healthy food PAC, right? I think you met Omega Wilson before from Mebane, North Carolina. He talks about the basic amenities PAC. These are basic things, and like you just said. So I just wanted to share, to add to what you're saying as a way for folks to think about how we move forward in the political space. Another question that I don't want to kind of see how you can bring this down as it relates to your work in Tennessee and in Memphis. So we know about, of course, the new executive order of 14096 on environmental justice, all the monies that are coming down from the federal government. How are you working to make sure, that Justice 40 framework, is working for state of Tennessee and folks are most in need, frontline communities in Memphis as well, as relates to IRA money, Inflation Reduction Act money, and bipartisan infrastructure law money? How are you making sure that money's getting to the people in most need?
Mm-hmm. Well, we got two things going. We got a couple of people who serve on a board that's distributing those funds, and I've asked them to prioritize this, and that has been effective, particularly as it relates to water and infrastructure. And we had 14% of the money reshifted towards communities like Memphis and Shelby County primarily. That was not initially that way. It was going out to rural counties. And so we're going to see hundreds of millions of dollars, hopefully, over the next few years here, next couple of years rather, coming into our community to help support with the infrastructure. But the other thing that I'm doing, Dr. Wilson, is going into November and December, I have inquiries into each of our departments that are supposed to be getting this IRA money and supposed to be using the Justice 40 framework and asking them how they're implementing this. Because the reality is this disinvestment that our community has had has also been happening because of a lack of attention and awareness to our most vulnerable communities, even by people who represent these areas. And so I'm going to just call those departments to the carpet and ask them explicitly and specifically what are they doing in line with Justice 40 to make sure that our communities are getting the resources that they need. There's no need, when we do have power and when we are in politics, when we're in these positions, there's no need for us to play guessing games. When there are people who are responsible and accountable for making sure that the resources are spent aligned with what the federal government has set as their guidelines, and if they are not doing that, then it looks like they don't need those federal funds.
Yeah, exactly. No, we have talking to the comptroller in Maryland. We created an environmental scorecard. We've updated to bring some Justice 40 criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Even how you tracking every dollar. And I know the states have different definitions, representative of a disadvantage. But then you have a federal tool like the CGIS tool, the Council for Environmental Quality's Climate Environmental Justice Screening tool. It doesn't include race. So
Right.
how do you make sure, as you said earlier, we got to understand race and undo racism.
That's
But how
right.
do you do that in a state where the politics you're dealing with and these issues around environmental justice, where you have systems in place where the monies may not have never as you gone to those places, those communities, and you're working hard, as you just said, to get those monies to communities, but then the tools that are in place are not the best tools, or people are not using tools. It just seems like there's so much, and I'm not talking specifically about Tennessee, just in general.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much money, there's so much opportunity, but as keynote, early morning keynote speaker Robin said, it could end up being wealth inequality that gets exacerbated because those who are doing the work, getting the monies, are not really from the community, and those monies aren't being invested. So you have the history of divestment, but you're gonna have like a missing investments where they skip these communities because of all not having those accountability infrastructure in place at the local level. I know I just said a lot, but I'll pass the mic. Just a comment. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, that's a great comment. It's the problem of race neutral policies, right? Which is something that our country too often loves and adores. And the reality is, we need to have race consciousness, right? Is the reason affirmative action, which has obviously benefited white women more than anybody else that it ever has, right? Like the overturning of it, it is a cultural thing. It's that this idea that we somehow need to be race neutral, when in reality we need to be more race conscious, because the inequalities and injustices of this country fall along the lines of race, right? Whether that be Native Americans and indigenous people, be Black, African American folks, Hispanic, Latino folks, right? Like it is a country whose systems have been overwhelmingly for the benefit of white folks to the disadvantage of everybody else. And so if we're only looking at how sparsely populated an area is or something like this or that, then you are missing a lot. That is not to say that we do not need to invest in our rural counties that are white, who struggle with a lot of resources or lack thereof because of the people in positions of power maintaining a status quo for wealthy white people to the disadvantage of poor white people, right? Like, we need to pay attention to that, but we've got to know the history of this country has been designed against certain people, and those folks deserve the resources and need the resources more. And so it is important that we use all of the tools that are available, but that we also use the history that we know and the truth that we know about which communities are suffering the most and have been, to your point, missed and denied access to these resources in the past to build a more just future, or to be a part of a more just transition, as it were.
Thank you. I mean, I could talk to, because we're both talkers. We could talk to you all day. I think there's a very powerful point about race conscious policy, because is what we're saying is we have the embeddedness of race and racism in all of our policies. How are you going to be race neutral? You weren't race neutral from the founding of the country. All of a sudden you want to be race neutral now, right? Go ahead.
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. Now all of a sudden race doesn't matter. But when the Constitution was written, there were some people who were 3/5 of a person, right? Like, but now all of a sudden that those things don't matter, and it's just like we're not past or beyond those things. They are part of us, and we have to recognize that.
Yeah, we have to recognize it. We have to try to, as Mustafa said yesterday, we have to think about the restoration. So we have to recognize, educate, empower, and restore, and not ignore, right? Not whitewash, no erasure, but understand where we are and how we got here. And race consciousness, just again, everybody listen, race consciousness is part of the framework in moving forward, not to be divisive,
Right.
but to understand in the bridge.
That's right.
In a loving way. As Justin said, are multiracial. coalition. That's been race conscious, right? So again, I could talk to you all day. We got sessions that start at 1:30. So I just want to, everybody that's in the chat, if you want to thank Representative Pearson, please do so. You can, I'm not sure what ways these emojis, you can throw some emojis in the chat, but I want to say thank you for a great lunchtime keynote. Love the work that you're doing. I mean, just was so excited when I met you a few years ago, seeing all the work that you're doing in Memphis. As I told you, I got family in Memphis, got family in Mississippi, just covering that part of the state and part of the region. And it's also seeing all the great work you've been doing as an advocate for the people in the legislature in Tennessee. So kudos to you. Appreciate you. Keep up the great work. And I just want to make sure that we are also, as we move forward with this movement, that there's opportunities for our communities here in the Mid-Atlantic to engage with the folks in Tennessee and that part of the regions. I know you were trying to build a regional EJ coalition. So want to make sure we have opportunities to connect across all these issues that you talked about today. So thank you again, sir.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you, and I appreciate all of you. You can go to our website, votejustinj.com. You can follow me on all social media at Justin J. Pearson. I do look forward to continuing to stay in touch. And if you do have further questions, I know we're unable to get to everybody, just reach out to us and we'll definitely get you an answer. Dr. Wilson, it's always a pleasure. And I'm so thankful, very humbled to have been a part of this.
Thank you, sir. You take care.
You too. God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.